in my first year of my undergrad. I thought I was going to do political science and media studies. It took me about 2 years to decide that political science and media studies was not for me. That was not something I enjoyed doing. And actually, what I was much better at and what I actually enjoyed doing was econ. So I switched into an econ major in my third year, and ramped through the whole major in 2 years. That was fun. If you remember, kind of, doing first and second year econ. Imagine doing that back to back with like your third and fourth year courses. I learned a lot of economics very quickly, and it worked out all right. After that, I went and did an MA in economics at Carleton University in Ottawa. I thought I was going to get a job out of my MA, but then I decided actually what I wanted to do is research. You can tell from this story that I'm a person who tends to change my mind a little bit. So I decided that actually I want to do research. If I want to do research, I probably needed to do a PhD. So I went to the University of Toronto. I did my PhD, and after my PhD, I got a job at the Bank of Canada. That was my first job at the Bank of Canada. I actually left and became a professor for a few years, and then I decided that actually I like the Bank of Canada a lot more, so I came back. So that's my kind of journey through economics. The message to kind of take from that is that there's nothing really wrong with changing your mind. I think a lot of people in university, I know when I was in university, I really felt penned in that there was like one career path. You had to do A, then B, then C, then D. A lot of people like to change their mind. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind. So that's kind of the message there. The Bank of Canada itself, we are Canada's central bank. We haven't always been an institution in Canada. The Bank of Canada is much younger than the country itself. The Bank of Canada only actually sort of enters into existence in the 1930s. Canada, we may or may not remember, is from back in 1867. So there were almost 70 years when there was no central bank. And then in the 1930s, the government decided that this was probably a good idea. A central bank, for those of you that are not super familiar with the term, is a national bank that is usually some sort of agent of the government that provides financial and banking services for the government. So this is a little bit different than a private sector bank, right? We might think of someone like TD or RBC or BMO, where you and I can go get, banking services. We can deposit money. Maybe we take out loans. But when the government needs to either deposit money or when it needs to raise new money from lending, it doesn't go to these private banks. It goes to its bank, the central bank. Now, the central bank is a little bit different from the rest of the government. We often aren't thought of as public servants in the same way that, say, someone who works for the Department of Finance or someone who works for the Treasury Board might be a public servant, because the central bank is a crown corporation. We have shares like a normal corporation, except those shares are held by the Office of the Minister of Finance. So we are a wholly owned corporation by the Government of Canada. And the sort of structure of this is that it provides independence. The Bank of Canada works with the government. We cooperate with the government, but we do so in an independent manner. We don't take direct orders from the political side of the government the way that a normal ministry might do. And this independence, if you've taken sort of any monetary theory courses or any courses on sort of later macroeconomics, is really an important part of the central bank, because the independence of the central bank allows it to pursue important policy goals that may be a little bit outside the political process. The central bank is big. We've been growing. We used to be a sort of much smaller institution, but now we have, I think it's more than 1,700 now. I think these slides are actually a little out of date. We have quite a large number of staff. Most of us work at the Ottawa head office, but there are now offices across the country. The biggest ones are in Calgary and Toronto, but there are also offices in Vancouver, Montreal, Halifax, and down in New York. So the central bank has really expanded its footprint, and this is an institution that is really working to sort of move forward in the 2020s. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on at the Bank of Canada right now. It's not really the same as a lot of other government institutions. It's honestly a fun place to be. The central bank operates on what we call our 4 mandates, and some of these will probably sound pretty familiar, and some of them may sound a little bit less familiar. They all sort of have to do with economics and finance, but a few of them are more up the lines of what, everyday people see in their lives. The 2 big ones that people are probably familiar with are 2 and 4 on this chart: conducting monetary policy and supplying the country's currency. When we talk about conducting monetary policy, most people think that this might have something to do with the interest rate. It does. This is kind of what central banks are known for. Supplying the currency, that one, we all have money in our lives. If you look at the money, you'll see that it's signed by the governor and the senior deputy governor. That's something we're probably familiar with. But the central bank also has 2 other important sort of mandates that it goes about, and those are what we call financial stability. That's the first one here, and what we call our fiscal agent function. That's number 3. The financial stability function is that the Bank of Canada works with other regulators in order to ensure a stable and safe financial system. The Bank of Canada has very few sort of regulatory options itself with financial stability, but its strength is that it can work with other regulators like securities commissions, like banking regulators, in order to make sure the system all sort of works coherently together. The third one, which is the fiscal agent function, is that we provide banking services to the government. So when the government needs to invest money, it comes to us. When the government needs to raise money, it comes to us. We are the bank for the government. You can think of it sort of, if you were to walk into like TD or RBC, things that you might do there, the government comes to us to do. What this means for you as sort of people who live in Canada, some of you might not be in Canada right now because I know school's very remote and a lot of people have sort of gone back home. But at one point you probably hope to come back to the campus in Waterloo. What that means for you is that things try and stay on sort of an even flow most of the time. We aim for a stable financial system. We aim for currency, which is, fairly trustworthy. We aim for stable, low inflation over long periods of time, which sort of helps smooth out the business cycles and prevent booms and busts. And this is really the story of what central banks try and do. The big one in there that you're probably familiar with is controlling inflation. The Bank of Canada works with the Government of Canada, and we have what we call our inflation targeting agreement. You can go on the Bank of Canada's website and you can look it up. But it is an agreement between the central bank and the Government of Canada on how the central bank will try and keep inflation over the next 5 years. Inflation, I probably don't need to tell this to an econ group, but in case you don't remember, is how much the prices for goods and services rise over time. Money now is worth more than money in the future. When prices go up, if we hold on to the same amount of money, it doesn't buy as much in the future, right? If prices go up too fast, then we worry about our standard of living in the future, and that's bad. So the big story of central banking, especially since the early 90s, has been inflation targeting and keeping inflation in check. Through our agreement with the Government of Canada, we try and keep inflation around 2% a year. The way we keep inflation around 2% a year is through controlling short-term interest rates. This is something we probably hear a lot about if we read the news or if we, sort of follow economics in Canada at all. We might hear about the bank raising interest rates. We might hear about the bank lowering interest rates. One of the innovations of modern central banking is that we do this on a regular schedule. It used to be way back in the day that the bank would raise and lower the interest rate whenever it, really felt like it was important. In modern times, we have 8 fixed days in the year when the bank makes a decision on interest rates. These are called our fixed announcement dates. We call them FADs because we love acronyms. This is, sort of how central banking operates these days. And it's sort of important to understand why interest rates might have something to do with inflation. You might remember from a macroeconomics class something called the money multiplier. You might remember something to do with fractional reserve banking. And the way this sort of works is when interest rates are lower, it's cheaper for banks to borrow. It's cheaper for people to take out loans. And because it's cheaper for people to take out loans and for banks to borrow, they take out more loans and they borrow more. They use those loans to invest, and that increases economic activity. However, if activity increases too quickly, you can get inflation. The opposite of true is true when interest rates are high. When interest rates are high, it's hard to borrow, it's hard to take out loans, and therefore it's harder to invest in new projects, and economic activity slows a bit. You get lower inflation. And that's sort of the rough link between inflation and interest rates. This is just saying what I said. You can thank our helpful communications department for putting together this slide deck. They're much better at slides than I am, to be honest. And there you go. A rough explanation of how we deal with inflation. When we think inflation's going to be high, we raise interest rates. It increases the cost of borrowing, and demand falls. Reverse is true. We already talked about this. Now, I mentioned that we had other functions. There were 3 of them. The first is a safe, secure currency. One thing that is very important to people is that if you have, literal $20 bills, that that those are real $20 bills and that people will accept them and that you're not going to get counterfeit money. People don't like that. It makes it hard to run a good economy. So one of the fun jobs the Bank of Canada has is designing and distributing banknotes. Banknotes are a different game in the year 2021 than they were, 50 years ago. In the year 2021, we have chemists on staff who advise us on things like how to make long-lasting polymer banknotes that won't melt if you put them on your car's dashboard. These are sort of concerns in the year 2021 that didn't exist before. We're very proud of our polymer banknotes. They have a lot of advantages over the old sort of paper ones, and the Bank of Canada is always sort of innovating in trying to increase the durability and trustworthiness of its bills. One thing that I think is a particularly fun little bit from the Bank of Canada. You may recognize this $10 bill. It's been circulating for some time now. It's the new 10 from the Bank of Canada from 2018. The fun thing I think about this this $10 bill is it's a vertical $10 bill. This is, I think, more controversial than it should be, because rarely, at least in North America, do you pay with $10 bills, holding them out, landscape style and giving them to someone. No, you give people bills vertically. So why not have bills that actually are faced in the direction that you normally transact with, right? That makes a lot of sense. And so we've now made some vertical bills. On this one, you may recognize Viola Desmond. This is also a bit of a departure from our prime ministerial theme in past money. And currently, the Bank of Canada has consultations out for who will be on the remaining series of these bills. So we may see some new faces on bills other than the 10 in the near future. Now, this is kind of what I do more. The other mandate we talked about was financial stability. That is a safe, stable, and efficient financial system. Uh, this comes through in a lot of things that maybe we don't think about but are really important behind the scenes. For example, if I use my Visa card to buy coffee, how do I know that a payment's actually going to get made with that Visa card? Like, sure, computers do it. That's exciting, but there's something behind that. And the Bank of Canada works on things like retail payments. When I put money in my bank to pay someone else through something like an e-transfer, how do I know that they're actually going to get the money? Payment systems like this are sort of how the economy functions. And the Bank of Canada has a key role in sort of monitoring these. The other thing we do is we deal with vulnerabilities. There are always vulnerabilities in the financial system. We can't get rid of them entirely. But the Bank of Canada concerns itself with things like, are housing markets overheated? Do people have too much debt? Is climate change going to sort of fundamentally impact the economy in some way that we need to deal with? Is cybersecurity important? What if we all logged on to our banks tomorrow and they didn't work because of something like a malware attack? This is something that really concerns Canadians, but that maybe we don't think about all the time. And this is sort of right in the wheelhouse of the Bank of Canada. My own research is actually on cybersecurity in the financial system, so that's that one's sort of near and dear to me. The last one, I already talked about this, is that we're the banker for the government. Not only do we hold on to their money for them, but we also lend it out from time to time in order to earn a return. We hold the government's reserves of other currencies. Those are US dollars, euros, British pounds, and yen. And if need be, now this hasn't happened in some time, the Bank of Canada could intervene to stop Canadian dollar volatility. We have a lot of other things going on. I've already talked about Bank of Canada. It's a fun place to work. I really do think that's true. We have things going on like digital currency. We call it CBDC, which is central bank digital currency. We work on things like climate change. We work on things like sustainability. There's a lot of really good work going on at the Bank of Canada. I think it's an exciting time to be in central banking. And one of the benefits to the Bank of Canada versus sort of other institutions that you might look at is its independence from the government. Because we're an independent body, because we're concerned about how these things impact the financial system, we're able to pursue some of these priorities, and especially researchers like myself, with a little bit more freedom than you might see elsewhere. I know this is a talk to an economics group, but for those of you outside of the economics profession, or who might consider something else after econ, there are a whole lot of other jobs at the bank. Everything from HR to legal to auditing. We have a huge IT staff. I know there's a big engineering group at Waterloo, but the Bank of Canada has just about every career you can think of. It's a good place. Now, with kind of last 10 minutes, I think it's probably a good time to talk about careers and opportunities at the banks. That's what people come to these for. The first interaction that a lot of people have with the bank is through one of our student work programs. We have co-op programs, we have internships, we have competitions that you may or may not have participated in the past. These are a great way to sort of get experience at the bank without sort of settling in for too long a term. The co-op programs and the internships especially are really good if you are pursuing an MA or a PhD after your undergrad. They give you a great chance to sort of get experience with the data sets available at the bank and the type of work that we do. I cannot recommend them highly enough. The Governor's Challenge is a case competition run by the Bank of Canada every year. I am proud to say, as a former professor at Laurier, that Laurier did very well in this competition every year. So I would highly recommend that the University of Waterloo work on getting as good as Laurier was at it. Just because I think it's it's kind of important to have good competition down the road. The Bank of Canada does offer a number of scholarships for those in the economics profession, especially students with disabilities, Indigenous or First Nation students, students from visible minorities or other racialized groups. You can look into these. Not only are there scholarships, but often there are work placement opportunities associated with these scholarships. When I was doing my onboarding at my most recent hire at the bank, one of the people there was a research assistant who had come from one of these scholarships. So they are something that can sort of provide a bit of a leg up. We have a master's scholarship as well for those of you who go on to do a master's degree. It is geared towards women in the economics and finance professions. If you go on to a master's degree, there are up to 5 of them. $10,000 is a nice cost deferral for a master's degree. So I highly recommend it if you are a woman who is looking into doing grad school in econ or finance. If you have done any research, we offer awards for student papers at both the undergraduate and graduate level. You can go onto our website and take a look at the student paper awards. They're a good way to get your paper recognized. I don't really have much more to say than that. I think that a lot of people who do research in their undergrad and their masters, I know I did, it can kind of feel like, you write a research paper for a course and what am I going to do with it? Here's something to do with it. If you wrote a good paper, why not? And perhaps more importantly, long-term careers at the bank. We have sort of 3 levels for university entry. I'm sort of being mindful that I'm just about to run out of time here. We have 3 levels for entry into the Bank of Canada coming out of university. If you are just finishing your undergraduate degree, you are looking at the research assistant track. If you are just finishing your master's degree, you are looking at the economist track. Or if you are looking into a PhD, and this is what I did, you are looking at the senior economist track. The website in that link has a lot more details, but I'll sort of give a brief description of each one. Research assistants play a really important role at the bank. We're really proud of our research assistants and our research assistant program. Research assistants are invaluable to the economics and financial work at the bank. Without our RAs, we would not get nearly as much done as we do. It is a great opportunity to get hands-on experience with real data sets and learn what data is actually available and how to use it. This is sort of above and beyond what you could expect in any of your undergraduate courses. It is a real opportunity to learn about how econ and finance work on a practical level. I cannot recommend it enough. It is a great sort of crash course in learning how data actually works. And if you're not just in it for the thrill of using data, you also get to contribute to the sort of broader economic and financial research at the bank. So you're also doing good for the institution and the country as a whole. If you are in as a research assistant, it is normally a 1 or 2 year program. Some people stay with the bank after that, but a lot of people, after being an RA for a few years, decide that really they do want to go back to school because research is something that they want to get interested in. So a lot of people will do a research assistantship and then ultimately go on to something like a master's or a PhD afterwards. Some stay at the bank. The first person who was ever my research assistant at the bank is still at the bank. He went into a career in trading at the bank, which I think is fun. But yeah, so I highly recommend our RA recruitment track. The economist and analyst track, that is if you are in a master's degree. Usually these come in as what we call rotational analysts. So what that is you work with a number of different groups over time. So you might work with one group for a year, and then move to another group and work with them for a year, and then move to another group and work with them for a year. And the idea is to sort of get experience across the bank before, sort of deciding longer term what you want to do. This is, I think, important for people who are fresh out of degrees. And I really do like our economist program. It's a good one. Last but not least, PhD recruitment. This is where I came in. A lot of PhDs come in directly as researchers. I came in as a researcher. You get hired based on your PhD research and how it might contribute to the Bank of Canada. I'm kind of fortunate. A lot of my research is stuff that the Bank of Canada is sort of directly interested in, and that's why it's sort of worked out for me. Again, here's a link. I know you can't actually click on these slides, so you can't click on it, but it's pretty easy to find on the website, to be honest. Last but not least, and I kind of got like 2 minutes to wrap it up here. I thought I should include a slide on sort of what I like specifically about the bank. And it's that as an economist and as someone who is trained as an economist, the bank, I think, gives me the best opportunity to really apply directly what I learned. I feel like in a lot of jobs that you might get with an econ degree, you do something that's kind of like economics, but not quite. The Bank of Canada does economics. I still solve models pen and paper sometimes. More often than not, I use Maple because I'm older and lazier now. But I still get to do math, which I like. I get to do data exercises like I like. I get to code, which I like. These are all things that people actually do at the Bank of Canada, which is really rewarding. The other thing that I have to say about the organization is that it feels like you are on a team that is doing something for the greater good. A lot of jobs, you might kind of feel like you're sort of working on your own thing, or you might kind of wonder, what the big objective is in all your work. And the Bank of Canada, it's very clear. There's a team atmosphere. Everyone's working towards a goal. It's something that I really do feel good about. So that is sort of my unqualified recommendation of the bank. I have no reservations in saying that they're a good employer, and it's not just because they sent me here. That's a little grain of salt there, but I can unqualifiedly recommend them as an employer. So here are links to our website. I already gave a couple other links, but thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Hopefully, I will answer the questions well.
Thank you so much, David, for your talk. It was really insightful to hear about your personal career journey, the Bank of Canada's role in maintaining Canadian economy, and I personally loved hearing about the new vertical $10 bill. It's something I never seen before. Now we are going to move on to the Q&A session where you can ask any question you have for David, and we are going to be using Slido. I'm going to insert the link into the chat, and the code to join is visible on the screen now. And the code is 715788. And for anyone on Slido, you can ask or upvote any existing question. Question with more likes will be brought higher up for the visibility for David to answer it. If anyone wants to go off mute and have a direct question to David, please don't hesitate and feel free to. And I think to start off, Crystal might have the first question, and I'll hand it over to Crystal.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, David. I had a question, and it's not on the screen right now, but it's more of a personal question about my career. I have done quite a lot of internships across companies like RBC, Deloitte, and right now I'm working at Microsoft. And these are all very kind of fast-paced companies in industry. And I worry that if I take a job kind of in the public sector, like I hear things like public sector is slower, you get less chance to make impact, there's more red tape. And I was just wondering if there's anything in your experience that could help me kind of allay those concerns.
That's a good one. I like that. No, this is a common concern, right? Government has a reputation for being a place with a bit of bureaucracy behind it. One of my favorite shows, I think it's probably just a little bit old for the current generation of university students, is Parks and Recreations. I think it was on TV, probably like 10 years ago. I feel like it's longer than that now. This was a show about government, and it was all about government bureaucracy. The Bank of Canada is a little bit different from the rest of the federal government. I'm not going to say there's no bureaucracy. Everywhere has bureaucracy. Even a private bank has bureaucracy to some degree. But the Bank of Canada is definitely lighter than a lot of the federal government on bureaucracy. As just one example, they've sent me here today to answer questions about the Bank of Canada. This is something that maybe in the federal government would be something that like an HR person would do, or that they would send like communications staff to do. But they've sent me, a researcher, to sort of off the cuff some questions on the Bank of Canada. So that's sort of a bit of a demonstration that we might have a little bit more freedom than a normal public sector institution. I'm not going to say there are no rules, but there are fewer rules. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, and the next question is from Slido. How is working at Bank of Canada different from working in academy?
That's a good question. So I liked being a professor. I enjoyed being a professor. Revealed preference would indicate that I liked being at a central bank a little bit better, since I left being a professor to go back to a central bank. The real difference is in the type of work you do. So at the central bank, a lot of people still do research. I do the same research as someone at the central bank that I did when I was a professor. When I was a professor, I taught. So at Laurier, I taught BU 473, which was investments management. It was a course about constructing portfolios. Instead, at the central bank, I provide policy advice. So when things become of interest to people like our governor or our deputy governors, they look to researchers like myself for answers to these questions. And what I do is I use my economics training in order to come up with what I think are, coherent, well-justified responses to these. I provide options on how we might proceed, and I talk about benefits to certain options and costs to certain options. And, at the end of the day, I really like doing this. I like feeling like I'm making a difference. I like feeling like I'm able to sort of make change. And this is something that's really appealing to me. If you are interested in research, which I am, the one thing I highly recommend about the central bank is that it is great for idea generation. One thing that can, when you're at a university, especially during COVID when everyone's working from home, it can feel a little isolating sometimes, right? Maybe there's not people in your department who do exactly what you're interested in. But at the central bank, there is so much going on. I have had some of my best research ideas at the central bank. So that's another sort of big difference.
That's great. So the next question would be, would you recommend pursuing an MA right after undergrad or working for a couple years first and then doing it?
So that's a good one. I did my MA right after my undergrad. I did undergrad, MA, PhD as sort of a straight shot, no breaks. There are benefits to that approach. But if I had to do it all over again, I maybe would have taken a year or two after my undergrad if I had to take the choice. The reason is that when I went into my MA, I basically had to learn coding entirely from scratch. I'm old enough that when I did my undergrad, they didn't really teach coding and data work in undergrad. This was very light. This was very non-emphasized. And then when I got to my MA, all of a sudden I was expected to know how to work with data and how to code. And I felt a little bit behind the ball on that one. So if I had done something that would have let me get my hands a little bit, dirty and learn how to use data a little bit better, I think that would have been helpful for my MA if I had to do it all over again. But I don't think either way is wrong.
Definitely. So the next question would be, what courses could I take in my free time, which would give me an edge in the interview process, but also help me build knowledge to succeed in banking industry?
That's a good question. So yeah, as I sort of mentioned, there's a lot of emphasis on coding these days in the economics and finance profession. So anything that helps you learn, things like SQL or Python will probably be helpful. Those are pretty common. And any course that sort of helps you learn a little bit more about data analytics. There are a lot of data science jobs out of econ degrees now. So popular ones like Stata, SAS, R, those are all pretty good to learn. So I kind of recommend technical courses. On like a more econ level, one of the best courses I took in my undergrad degree was on public speaking. It wasn't on econ at all, but it was offered by the econ department, and it was on public speaking. And this was a great course because all of a sudden when you get a job, people expect you to present PowerPoint all day. And if you haven't maybe spent all day presenting PowerPoint before, there are a lot of messy first few presentations. So I kind of highly recommend a public speaking course if your school offers it, even if it's not in the econ department. It might come through something like an arts department or something like that. Econ courses, public sector econ. That was a great fourth year course. I really liked that. It really sort of solidified the ideas of what it is the government's trying to do. I really liked my public econ course in fourth year.
Oh, definitely. There are speech comp courses offered in University of Waterloo, and I think it's also a mandatory course for art students. So that would be a course that might be similar to what you're speaking about. And the next question is Bank of Canada accommodating for being adjunct faculty? I'm a graduate student interested in working for the bank, but also find teaching quite appealing.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Just to provide some sort of context to that for people who might not be super familiar with that question. A lot of people who finish up grad school, either an MA or a PhD, go back to universities or colleges like Conestoga to teach as adjuncts, who you might also know as contract faculty. I think at Laurier they're called lecturers. Either way, not super important. But a lot of these people have jobs outside of teaching. There are people at the Bank of Canada who are PhD researchers, for example, who teach at the local universities. There are quite a few people who teach at Ottawa and Carleton. There are a few people who go teach a little bit farther. I know someone who teaches courses at Queen's and someone else who teaches at University of Toronto. So these do exist. In terms of whether there's a global rule about them, I don't think there is, or at least if there is one, I don't know it. I think this is kind of a discussion between researchers and their managers, but it's certainly something that exists.
And the next question will be, how likely is it for students with limited work experience to secure any entry-level position in public sector?
So that's a good question. So I guess public sector is kind of broad. I'll talk a little bit about the bank, which I know, and then a little bit about the broader public service, which I know a little bit less about. At the Bank of Canada for the Research Assistant Program, we have absolutely hired students before who haven't had the 4 full years of co-op or anything like that. We hire people based on their strengths. So if you don't have something like co-op experience, or if you don't have something like an existing internship, there are things that can sort of prove that you have the strengths that you might gain through that. Things like coding projects. I know a lot of people have like a GitHub page or something like that. Things like research projects that you've done in school. Knowing basic things about the bank and its functions. These are important in interviews. We often ask about the bank in interviews to see if you kind of know what the bank does. So there are ways to sort of make yourself stand out, even if you haven't had the full 4 years of co-op experience. Yeah, I didn't have an economics job until I was in my master's degree. I didn't have an economics job in my undergrad, so.
That's great. The next question is MA or a PhD a strict requirement to apply for the senior researcher position?
That's a good question. You would have to check the job ad specifically. I know there are economists with MAs. I know there are senior economists with MAs, but I don't think they went directly into it. I think they might have worked up to it. You would have to check with HR on that. I'm not super familiar with that. I guess I sort of went in with a PhD, so I never put much thought into that.
Sounds good. This might be a little different question. Do you have any thoughts on future on new technologies such as cryptocurrencies?
So fintech, we call that fintech. When I was going through university, fintech was the new and exciting field of crowdfunding. That was the hot new thing when I was going through university. The Oculus Rift had just been funded through crowdfunding, which you may or may not know is like a VR headset that eventually got bought by Facebook. So this was like my first interest in fintech. I think this is really interesting stuff. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in finance these days. You can think of things like robo advisors. So these are platforms like Wealthsimple that just didn't exist like 10 years ago. You can think of things like cryptocurrency is a good example. The Bank of Canada has a big project on central bank digital currency that you can read all about on our website. This is something that people are obviously interested in. Even simple things that have changed in banking in like the past 10 years. Like you can deposit a check by taking a picture of it. That's wild to someone of my age. Like I'm used to having to like go to the bank and sign the check and you give it to the teller. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in finance these days. And yeah, I love learning about it. This is exactly what I get to do all day.
Definitely, that's really fascinating. And the next question will be, how is the interview and the application process in bank different from elsewhere? I heard there are technical assignments you have to do.
Yes. So there are, I guess calling them an assignment is a fair word. There are often work associated with the interview process. I think you'll find this at a lot of places these days. It's a lot more common to be asked to provide like a technical sample or something like that in interviews. The Bank of Canada is no different. The way we're kind of similar and different from everywhere else. Similar. We've been doing video interviews for a long time now. We were doing video interviews before COVID, so we're obviously still doing them now. You can probably expect a video interview at some point in time. often, and I think you see this a lot of places now, we'll do interviews with 2 or 3 interviewers rather than just one-on-one. I think that's pretty common these days. These are all pretty standard. The thing to watch out for with the Bank of Canada's interview process is timelines. And this is where we sort of creep just a little bit closer to being like government. All of our applications tend to be very early. Often they are in the fall for jobs that start in the summer. So it's important to sort of stay ahead of these things. Make sure that you meet the deadlines. Yeah, that's what I would say to look out for.
Sounds good. And the next question is coding experience a must for the RA position? Can you still succeed in the RA position with little to no coding experience?
So I can't speak for the entire bank, but in the sort of financial markets group at the bank, RAs do a lot of coding. This is a coding heavy job in the finance side. It might be different in parts of the bank that I'm not familiar with, but at least as far as I've dealt with, the RA positions have a lot of coding. As sort of a sidetrack to that, what I would usually recommend if someone wanted to get into coding for a position like this is that often we look for someone who has a good grasp of both analytics languages and more sort of functional general purpose languages. So knowing something like Python, which is a little bit more general purpose, and also knowing something like Stata, which is a little bit more geared towards analytics, is a good balance for coding for a lot of jobs these days.
Sounds good. Due to time constraint, I think this would be the last question. This question is, do you have a pitch on why student should work at the bank compared to being a researcher in private sector? This question also follows with a smiley.
I like the smiley after questions. So I think I already kind of mentioned this, but I'll reiterate this point, is that the real feeling at the Bank of Canada is that you're working towards something that is for the betterment of sort of Canadian society in general. I've worked before in private sector jobs. I've worked before in academia. And at least in my experience, you just don't get that same thing. It really feels at the bank like your research is being used for something important, for something that is actually going towards fixing things. As an example, the last policy file I was working on was a little bit outside my area. I didn't know so much about it, but I still had to write a briefing note on it. And so what I did was I went around to the researchers who did know what this was about, and I asked them all for input on it. I asked, what's the right answer for this? What would you do for that? In order to get, researchers' input on the thing that they actually understood. And this is, I think, a little bit different than you might find it in the private sector. There's a little bit less looking over your shoulder. There's a little bit less sort of worrying about what the next day brings. It's very cooperative, which is, it's a good environment. Maybe it's not for everyone, but I like it.
That's great. And that ends our question answer session. And thank you, David Cimon, for your great presentation and making us all excited about economics and Bank of Canada. We all enjoyed and appreciate your time speaking at this event. It was really insightful, thought-provoking to hear about your experiences in the bank. And also a little selfish shout out before we end. You can follow the Economic Society on Facebook and Instagram. If you have any feedback or recommendation, please feel free to email us at uw.economics.society@gmail.com. Also, a reminder for the stock pitch competition. Today is the last day to join.
Yeah, thank you, David, so much for your time today. We really appreciated it.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, and have a good rest of your summer.
All right, thank you everybody for joining. Have a great rest of your day.